We're live. It is 7:30, so I'm a little bit late, but that's okay. Tonight we're going to talk about the thumbnail that I have up. It's a early 4.6 liter 96 to 98, I believe, when they had the B heads on it with the dual ports. And so this one had this intake manifold had what's called an Emmerich plate on it. So it had a little valve in one of the ports. And so it breathed through one port, and then they would open this up and breathe through the other port, and then that way they could improve velocity and cylinder filling and stuff. And it was a cool trick to try to enhance torque production basically on a motor that was not extremely torquey to begin with. The interesting thing is the intake manifold. If you look at the photo, this is a modified version of that manifold. Normally these have a removable lid, and then inside the lid, they have crisscross runners that, this is the church, this is the steeple, this is what they look like. They crisscross over like this. They go from one side over into the other, then from this side over into this side, and then they open up down into a common plenum, and then you have the lid that goes over that, and then the airflow has to seemingly go by all of the runners and stuff. But again, the air's not flowing into there and then into a port. The air is just filling the common plenum, and the runners are drawing air from the common plenum. So that's a common mistake made in figuring out how these things work. Obviously, it does work because the OEMs designed it, and they're very, very good about that. But they modified this, and as you can see, what they've done is they've effectively taken and cut a bunch of these runners off and made them much shorter runners. Not an uncommon modification, especially on long runner intake manifolds. When we do short runner intake manifolds on anything, earlier this morning, we were talking about the carbon PTR intake manifold, which is, like a Holley high ram kind of, although a fancy version of it, not a cast aluminum one, a carbon fiber one full of carbon fibery goodness. And it even had adjustable stacks in it and had a big lid on it with a front mounted throttle body. This is a side mounted throttle body. As I said, though, they even modified the lid on it and cut off the factory opening and then welded on basically a new flange and a tapered entry. They did a fairly good job on the lid. And so that they could mount a big monoblade throttle body, because you'd need 2,500 CFM worth of airflow going into a motor that was probably making 400 horsepower if it had cams in it. So that part of it was good. But my question is, and this will, well, we'll have to have a poll on this. But the discussion tonight is, what did they do wrong on this intake manifold? If you take a look at the thumbnail, you can kind of see they did a couple of things. One, in my opinion, one of the things is that they made the runners very short. Short runners, as we know, improve power at the top of the RPM range. Not a bad idea when you're talking about a modular Ford that has plenty of head flow. If you put something in it besides the factory camshafts, then you can run some RPM in this thing. Obviously, Mahowitz and MMR and all these guys that have run these things over the years. This is obviously a pre-Coyote. This is from the 1990s, so it goes way back, although mid to late 90s. So you can run RPM with these, and so getting them to run RPM, not a terrible idea. They can make power. But as always, there's a trade-off in power, which is why they did the Emmerich plates anyway. So that they had an intake manifold that was designed to run high RPM, 6,000 or even 62 or 6,300, let's say. And they wanted more low-speed power, so that's why they did the little blade in one of the runners. But in shortening these runners, they exaggerated that even more. So they had, let's make more peak power, which is good, but you always trade low speed power. In fact, in this case, you trade power for a lot of the RPM range. And that's, for most street cars, especially a street car lacking torque already, not a good idea, because those cars were reasonably heavy. And the combination of a lack of torque meant that you had to put, if you stuck gear in them and kept the RPMs up, then they were a lot more fun. But getting rid of the torque is not good, which is why the cure for all of these mod motors was just run boost on them, and then everything is solved. Put something on them like they did with the 03 and 04 Cobra, a nice positive displacement supercharger, and all of a sudden all of your problems are cured. Or put a Kenny Bell or a Whipple or a Turbo or a Vortec even. All of those will definitely help the situation, because boost is no matter what the question is, boost is always the answer. So you can cure it that way. But The question is, on this photo, what else did they do wrong? So one, I think that shortening the runners was not a good idea. I would have gone a different route. And I made a custom intake manifold for these, an adjustable one with dual plenums and dual throttle bodies. Not particularly street friendly. Not that the intake manifold didn't work, but just it's not going to fit under the hood the way that I had designed it. But good for testing on the dyno, and made good power. But the problem is, in addition to making them short runners, when they cut these runners, you see, there's no radius entry. It's just a sharp edge. They just cut them off and thought, okay, we're gonna have short runners. Oh, well, that's great, but now they don't flow as well because the factory ones have a radius entry on them, and every entry should have a radius. I mean, every motor should have a radius entry. And I've actually done that test on changing one of the people that made these fabricated sniper style, Hogan sheet metal-esque intake manifolds. This was pre-sniper, but they made that manifold basically a fabricated one, and then had runners coming up, flange and runners, and then a common plenum, all aluminum-y, and then had a throttle body mount on the front of it. But when they did it, they didn't have radius entries, probably because it was a lot easier for them to fabricate that way, because that way it was easier for them to insert the runners. So it just had edges on them, basically, a lot like this one does. And what I did was we cut the top of the manifold off. We did a test where we ran this the way that it was. We cut the top of the manifold off. We welded on radius entries onto all of them, and then ran it again. And then I just taped up the lid, because once, it was only problematic when it was under vacuum, but once it went to wide open throttle, it was not an issue at all for sealing. And so it worked out just fine. And just having the radius entries on them, and we can argue that it changed the runner length a little bit, although the way that the radius is working, and where the reflected wave starts, the radius entry actually adds very little to runner length. But having the radius entry definitely improved the flow rate of the port a lot. And I've tested that before. I've tested on the flow bench. We've tested just a tube, like a 2-inch tube, and then a 2-inch tube with not even a full radius air horn on it, just a simple flare, which gets us 90% of what, the double throwdown radius entry gets us. And I just took them over to the muffler shop. So that's an easy test. I just flowed one of the tubes and then flowed the other one, and the flared entry improved airflow a lot, 8 or 10%. So the numbers I'm remembering are around 300 and 325 or 330 CFM. So it helped it quite a bit, and it showed in power when we did this test, even on a motor that was not making a lot of power. I think that this was on a rec port headed LS, like a cammed LS3. So I want to say that it was in the 550 to 560 range probably. And it definitely showed a power gain going from the non-radius entry inside the plenum to a radius entry inside the plenum. And so jumping back to the 4.6 liter 4-valve deal, that would have been a definite plus. In some of these, because of where the runners are, how they're adjacent to each other, sometimes there's not a lot of room to put a radius entry, but you have to do what you can, because it will definitely improve the flow. And if you're going to this trouble to modify the intake manifold to make more power, and especially to make more power at a higher engine speed where airflow demand is greater, a radius entry would definitely be the way to go. So that's what they did. In my opinion, the runner's probably too short, and then a non-radius entry on the intake manifold on this particular one, probably not ideal. And I can look it up, but I don't think that this intake manifold did extremely well when we tested it. Dyno results, modular Ford. Modular Ford results. Let's see if we have an early. It might take a while to look this up, so I might not be able to do it while we're all watching here. Early 4.6 cams. Let's see, base. Yeah, I don't see him. I could have done a little bit more prepping here, but Kenny Bell, early 4.6. So I think I got something here. So we have the stock one. Test description. Oh yeah, taking away the Emmerichs. It did not like that. I did like putting cams in it though. The 4-valve stuff does respond to cams pretty well. And I think we put the same ones that I ran in the 03 Cobra, which were the 262 comp cams. Hey, Miss, what's up? Todd's in the house. So I'm going to go through here and then we'll go through top chat a little bit so I can get back to the beginning and then we'll go to live. Modded some of these manifolds and built many sheet metal intake manifolds. Richard, you maybe get a GoPed and refurbish it with one of my kids after your live feed a while back. I still have mine. Now I use it to go over to 7-Eleven. It's raining now, so don't really use it. Otherwise you get the nice stripe up your back or whatever. But it's a cool thing to have with your kids. Variable runner intakes are also a good idea. So we're going to switch over. I'm going live. It's all the way live. Let's see. Okay, I'm back now. Tim, what's up? My engineering tutor always told me extra points for ingenuity. Speaking of short runner, Mr. Holt, horsepower monster tested a low, mid, and high ram. Back to back, the low ram didn't lose as much power as I was expecting. It shouldn't lose a whole bunch compared to a high ram, but it will definitely lose stuff down low. The runner length isn't dramatic. The change in runner length isn't dramatic between those two, but between a high ram and a truck manifold or a fast manifold, it's a pretty good bit. I did run the Sullivan intake manifold on these also, not on the B-headed one, I don't think, but on the later 03 Cobra deal, and we ran both on a 5.4 and on a 4.6. Recal's in the house. Let's not forget about the sound wave that goes in a manifold. Are you talking about the reflected wave? It's a reflected wave that travels up the speed of sound. It's always better to measure pushrod length. Does Morel 7717 use shorter pushrods than L7 lifter? I don't know. I never used a Morel lifter. I got a 4.62 valve in my 96 Mercury Grand Marquis under 147,000 kilometers. So that's a 96. So that's going to be a non-PI one. I don't have a poll up yet. No, no, Amos, no 8.1 yet. Although I do want to test that. Bam, 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 bam. Funny thing is that the calibration plate that comes on a Superflow 600 bench is a sharp edge orifice. I often question that. It's okay if it's a calibration plate. They just care that it flows exactly what it's supposed to flow. It's just testing your thing. So if it does what it's supposed to do, whether it has a radius on it, I mean, they could calibrate it with a radius entry too. And as long as it matched that, that's all that they would care about. It would certainly flow more with a radius entry on it. 408 home ported 862 heads, 92 millimeter throttle body, short summit fabricated intake manifold, and BTR stage 3 truck cam. What is your question about that? Are you questioning whether that stuff will all work? The Green 4V stock cams are worth a minimum of 30 horsepower. I don't know that you're going to get that. We didn't see anywhere near that much, and you won't get that every time because sometimes they're right. But there is power to be had usually from degreeing the cams. 4.64 valve with a tunnel ram and a screw blower. Why can't someone make a type of equal length intake runner? A Holley high ram has equal length intake runners. Turbo car, if you retard the timing too much too long, will you melt the exhaust valve or just lose power? Well, you'll continue to lose power, but you'll also increase the exhaust gas temperature. So it will be a function of you would only retard the timing enough to ward off detonation. And then how long are you running at wide open throttle under boost in that retarded timing condition? I'm a little shocked that the aluminum 5.3 is holding up so well with all the dyno abuse. It's just runs. It's just pulls on it. It's not hard on it. The SHO intake manifold and the Yamaha motor was awesome. It was cool. And those had a long and short runner that merged together, right? I mean, more like the spaghetti snake look with like 12-inch runners. 12-inch runners are not very long. You want it to look like a header. There are intake manifolds that look like that. There are factory ones that look like that. So Rancher Lee, you put 7717 Morel lifters in and ended up with 7375 Pushrod. That's like just like a stock one. Do you recommend trunnion upgrades for the LS rockers? Yes, mostly because most of the engines that we get from the wrecking yard have lots of miles on them, and let's face it, the trunnions have 300,000 or 400,000 miles on them. So giving them some love is not a bad idea. How long are the runners on those budget sheet metal manifolds? I don't know, 6 or 7 inches probably. Like to see a twin plenum intake with runners crossed over like 180-degree headers. Well, the cross ram from Holley does that, and the one from Edelbrock does that. And the ones that I did a cross ram to begin with, but it's so much easier to do an intake manifold that goes straight up because that way it's easier to adjust the lengths. The cam gears are 4 degrees retarded on the passenger head and 1 to 2 degrees advanced on the driver head. I've tested lots of them. We degreed lots of 4-valve and 2-valve stuff, and the amount that they're off from the factory actually varies. It's not a consistent amount. If it was a consistent amount, it'd be easy to fix. but they're not consistent. And so we've done that. And I had stories that I did on that with Mahovitz when we adjusted. I think it was about 12 horsepower when I did it. I did get to ride a Yamaha RD350 in the late 70s, would get on the pipe around 6,000, and something went from feeling like a 250 to 500. They were good. An RD350 was cool. I got to ride an RD400 a lot when I was younger in high school. What I mean is runners in each plenum spaced evenly in the firing sequence, not just a typical cross ramp. I don't know what you mean by spaced evenly in the firing sequence. Richard, in the stock LS3 intake versus the world, you tested an LS2 manifold with adapters and lost like 30 horsepower. Do you think it would be worth me trying the opposite on my LS1? So what do you want to do with your LS1? You want to put an LS1 on an LS3 motor? That would be a terrible idea. You want to put an LS3 intake manifold on your LS1? I've tested that too. I've gone both ways on that. And neither one of them are good. The adapters are not a good idea. The adapters work on they were first made, as far as I know, for guys wanting to put the blower manifolds, the LSA blower manifolds on cathedral port applications, which that's not as bad of an idea. One, it's boosted, and so it all just finds its way. And also because the angle of attack of the blower manifold and the runner length is much shorter, but on neither one of the adapted manifolds was a good idea. Have you ever researched what intake seat cam timing matches what RPM, like 72 degrees intake seat closing versus 82 intake closing, assuming the same? The camshaft is not going to be the only thing that determines RPM. You can get dramatically different RPMs with the same camshaft with different intake manifolds. So camshaft is not going to be, it's not going to dictate. It's not going to be the only thing that dictates that. Richard, this is David. Recently boosted my 4.8 2000 Silverado. I want to send you pics of the. I don't know. I don't. You mean bold to run? Have you just give it a quick look? I don't know what you're asking me to look at. You have to. If you could be more specific and tell me what you're asking, I could give you an answer. Demon Tech, I'm glad you're back, man. Would you need to ring gap if you're going from a factory supercharger to a big turbo? Yeah, if you're going way up in boost, that's probably not a bad idea. Have you seen a cross ram for a small block Chevy? Yeah, I think I've run one. I think the guys from Speedmaster had I know I ran a downdraft. I've run a few of their manifolds. Maybe the one that I ran was a downdraft and not a cross ram, but it's the same kind of design. I didn't run Webers on it though. The flanges are for Webers, but the spacing is but these were run with EFI. If intake runners are far too long or short, how well will an exaggerated exhaust header design pull the power band back into shape? It probably won't. I mean, you can help a little bit. I found that the exhaust is not nearly as critical as the intake for optimizing power production. Force fed. So you modified a couple of RD350 cases and welded them and added a cylinder? How did you connect all that together? How did you have a crankshaft to work with all of that? Let's see. David makes 400 horsepower with 420 foot-pound stock bottom and stock top. Are you running a boosted 4.8? Because a stock 4.8 doesn't make anywhere near that. With eventual boost in mind, would it be worth scrapping my sheet metal intake for a Holly mid ram? I don't recommend the Holly mid ram for anything to anybody ever. It's not a good intake manifold design. The high ram is good for lots of top end power if that's where you want. Otherwise, a mid ram doesn't add a bunch of low speed power. The mid ram makes less than the high ram basically everywhere. You can take a look at the intake manifold test where I've run that many times. We ran it in every configuration. We ran it in EFI configuration. We ran it without the lid on it. We ran two 4150 throttle bodies on it in fuel injected configuration. We ran it in carbureted configuration. We ran it in all different ways. And the carburetors, I think, work the best on it, but it's not a good intake design. You'd be much better off with a truck intake manifold or a fast intake manifold, or if you want to run RPM, a high ram. Have you got any information about BTR about the new turbo cams compared to the current cams? No, I don't have any information on that. I didn't know that they were doing new ones. I think the crankshaft and rotating weight piston speed would have a lot of impact on how high it can rev. It doesn't really. The short block is not in the way of anything with RPM until you get way out there. The thing that's going to dictate RPM where the thing wants to make power is the camshaft, the intake, and the cylinder heads. And the intake manifold has to be part of that equation. It has to be a short runner intake manifold because the reflected wave works for high RPM. And longer runners don't do that. So even if you put lots of camshaft in it, like if you look at a really good example, an extreme example is like a stock eliminator car. So they're limited in, I think they're limited in lift. And what they do is put a lot of duration in the camshaft, but they still have to run the stock intake manifold. So what they do is they go up and make a certain peak power and then just carry that out. So it keeps revving when they run a lot of engine speed because they run a lot of camshaft in it. But it was already done making peak power though. I've never run a Predator carb on anything. Richard, have you gapped rings for an L83? I haven't gapped the rings on the L83 that I have yet. As factory horsepower numbers raise, what would you consider the minimum weight and rear wheel horsepower combo I need to still compete? I'm finishing my project up this winter. My goal is 3,000 pounds with me in it at 500 rear wheel horsepower. I don't. What is it you're trying to do? So, Todd, what is going on with your Holly HP? Just why didn't you call me and tell me what's going on? How much horsepower should an NA542 valve make with trick flow heads and a stage 3 cam spinning at 6,500? I don't know. I've never run any of that. I've never run a 542 valve. I've never run one on the dyno that I can remember. I'm sure I haven't. I've run 544 valves, but I've never run one on the dyno, even a stock one. So I don't know what it makes. And I've never certainly run one with heads and cam and stuff on it. Realistic horsepower number switching from a stock 01 Silverado throttle body. An 01 Silverado throttle body is a 78 millimeter. How are you going to a 92 millimeter on an intake manifold that has a 78 millimeter opening on it? unless you're going with the Trailblazer SS intake manifold. Yeah, Todd, just let me know what kind of problem you're having. I didn't realize you're having any kind of problems with the computer. Top fuels can't run screw blowers. That's against the rules. Only top alcohol stuff can. Top fuel runs a roots blower. Or at least they did the last time I checked. 87 GT Fiero with an LS4, very cool. 12.7. Any suggestions? What do you want to make it faster? Is that what you're trying to do? Obviously, a cam and springs would be the first thing that you do, and get rid of that stock LS4 intake manifold if you can, because that would be a big. You can easily pick up 100 horsepower on that motor if you did an intake manifold and a camshaft on it. David, everything being okay, so it's a turbo one and not a it's not a stock one. Okay, everything stock on my 4.8 with an on3 turbo kit. I'm at 8 pounds. You think it'd be okay to turn it up to 10 pounds? You're not going to ask for my opinion or for my permission to turn your boost up. You got to do that. That's all up to you. The motor will handle that. If you have not done any ring gap on it, and I don't know what fuel you're using, I don't know what your tune is. There's a lot of stuff that's going on there that I don't know about. The motor will easily handle that if all of the other things are right. Because we've on a stock bottom end 4.8, we've run more than twice that. We've run 26 pounds on it. So that's not a problem. The strength is there, but is the tune there? And we also put ring gap in ours, a lot of ring gap. Trailblazer bread box test. What? I don't know what that is. What's up next on the dyno? I don't know. The trophy 4-cylinder might be done, but probably the 2.2 Dodge. Richard, when I get this LS4 tomorrow, I'm going to throw it in the Ion. I'm debating on putting a pair of T76s on it instead of waiting for the machine shop on the big block. What do you recommend? You can put two. Can you fit two of those in there? Is there going to be room in that engine bay for that? Why wouldn't you just put one S475 if it will fit, or two 37 or 3582s? That's 1,000 horsepower stuff. But that thing really needs a cam in it and a better intake manifold. Realistic horsepower gains or any noticeable gains from a Trailblazer SS intake and a fast. Okay, so you're doing an intake swap too, not just the throttle body swap. Yes, you'll gain power from the intake manifold. Not so much from the throttle body, but you want to have the throttle body that matches the opening of the intake manifold. And a Trailblazer SS manifold is worth power over the truck manifold, even on a stock one. Not as much on a stock application as if you had a cam and stuff in it. Monza got my cam for my LS4, sloppy 1.5. That'll work good. Need 3-bolt, 4-pole cam gear, intake, head bolts, lifters, and buckets. Did you check the spec sheet for the deckness on the small block Ford? I didn't. AFR, SBF. Pusher head specs. Let's see. Airflow research. Specifications. Deck thickness is 0.325, they're saying, at least in the sheet here. I'm going to have to ask them about that. That doesn't seem like it's very thick to me. That's pretty minimal. I did not give up on the 4200. In fact, I was just talking to Calvin about that the other day. What is a hardballer intake manifold? I've never heard of it. What about a K24 and a Geostorm wagon? Well, you had me at K24, so yes is always the answer to that. So no ring gap and, of course, 91 octane. Do you have a, David, do you have a camshaft in it? Why don't you put a cam in this thing? An intake manifold made by HPS for guys swapping 5.4s into their Mustangs. The ring gap is 28 thousandths. In general, do you add ring gap at 1 bar and higher? Or no, I don't do it like that. You should just put it in if you have a turbo. If you have an LS and you're putting boost to it, you should put ring gap in it. And I say that having never done it on the aluminum motor because we just threw the turbo on there. I didn't have time when I was down there on the dyno to do that. Now I've had time and I still have not done it. But I don't do it based on boost. I do it based on knowing the fact that when you run a turbo on something, you are going to turn the boost up. Everybody does. And a guy that runs 7 pounds is going to want to, like David, is going to want to run 10, and then 10 becomes 15. And so you should just put the ring gap in there, and the ring gap doesn't hurt you at all. It just helps you. Looking at the Trailblazer SS intake, 09 Sierra 90 millimeter throttle body. Yeah, the factory 90 millimeter is going to be a drive-by-wire throttle body. What is needed to do LS, LT, VVT cam control? Well, the LT would be a completely separate thing from the LS, but they made VVT LS motors, and they have factory computers and harnesses that you could use to make those work if that's what you want to do. I can't do it on the engine dyno, but it can certainly be done in the car. Richard LS4, the transmission. I don't know about the transmission upgrades. That transmission is probably not very stout. And I think that that's one of the problems that guys were saying. It's easy to build the power, but the transmission won't hold it. Hey, David, anytime, man. You just need to. The thing is that you can run, if you put a camshaft in it, you could keep it at 7 pounds, but you'd have another 100 or 120 horsepower if you even running just 7 pounds or 8 pounds wherever you're at. The camshaft would help a lot. Richard, aside from the intake, the T76s I already have. Okay, those will work. Sitting in the box, wasting away. Let's see. Yes, 243s. What cam should I get? I get like a Truck Norris cam or something like that. I was going to duct it and run turbos out the trunk. That'll be cool. Put like the little diesel flapper valves on the top of it, on the top of the exhaust, because that would be super cool. John, thank you very much. Does the engine in the picture have slide or barrel ITBs just before the heads like the older Indy cars? It had the one in the photo is a 96 or 97 464 valve with a B head. So it has two ports going into the head. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And it has what are called Emmerich plates on it. So one of them is open. One of them has a blade that has a little bit of an opening. And then that thing opens up to improve airflow. But they're not barrel valves. It has a lid that goes over the top of it, and then a single throttle body on the lid. LS4 has Fruch's built oil pan mount starter. A 4T80. So that trans will be better then, right? John, thank you again. The problem with the LS4 stuff is stock gearing, 293 final drive. Is the 80 trans, does that have different gearing in it? The 4T80? Does that have a different first gear in it? Daniel, the mileage actually doesn't change ring gap very much on an LS. There's very little wear on the ring, and there's actually almost no wear on the cylinder. So I've taken apart 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 mile motors that still have ring gap in the teens. So that may work on small block Chevys, older stuff and older Dodges, but it doesn't do that on LS motors. So that's a myth about the ring gap thing. Oh, it's an older motor, so it's already got ring gap in it. No, it doesn't. You don't know what the ring gap is until you check it. You have to check it to know what it is. And having checked dozens of them from the wrecking yard, that thing doesn't correlate. The mileage and the ring gap does not correlate. Have you ever tested the BTR Stage 5 cam? I have not. I haven't done any ring gap on an L83. David, yeah, just let me know if you have any questions, man. Who makes better truck cams, Texas Speed or Brian Tooley? If you can define the word better there, then we could probably give you a different an answer maybe. Or the Buick and Olds 455 is the same strength? I wouldn't think so since they're different motors, but I can't tell you, and I don't know what you mean by stronger, like which one of them will take more power in stock trim. If you're trying to make more power, none of them you would run in stock trim anyway. So the Cobra intake is pretty good from the factory. Cutting it up hurts most of the time. This one definitely did. How high can you rev a stock bottom end 4.8? Yeah, we run to 7,000, past 7,000 a lot with the stock bottom end. The rotating assembly will take that without any problem. Your RPM issue is with valve train. I can tell you that that 1961 Trophy 4-cylinder had 125,000 ring gap, so it was a lot. Have you had any mercury stuff on the dyno? Like which one? What's your go-to cam for making best mid-range? I don't have one. That's why I have hundreds of cam tests up on the channel, so you can pick whatever curve that you want. There isn't one that's better than everything else. We've gone over selecting the best cam a lot, and the best cam is up to you. You're going to define the things that are going to dictate what the best cam is. most average power, most peak torque, most average torque, idle's the best, works with a stock converter, costs the least, because a lot of times that's number one on a lot of people's lists. So if I can buy that for $100 or $200 or whatever it is, they're going to buy that. The rest of the stuff becomes irrelevant. I don't care about the converter. I don't care about the idle quality. I don't care about how long cam lasts. If it's cheap, I'm going to buy it. So whatever that list is of things that you want, that you find attractive in a camshaft, that's going to be your best cam. That's not mine. It's not anybody else's. I mean, it might be other people's too. You may share the same one, but there isn't one out there that is the best one that everyone should get. Yeah, somebody was talking about ARP rod bolts. We haven't ever changed the rod bolts in any LS ever. So, and we've run a lot of RPM and stuff, so you don't need to do that. When we've done the big bang motors, the rod breaks and the rod will break, but the big end of the rod and the stock rod bolts are still there connected to the crankshaft. Is the Honda L15 a less desirable engine for performance? I don't know what that is. Is that the one that's in the Fit? Obviously there are performance ones like the K series stuff, the B series stuff, the C and the J, the H, and all of the VTEC stuff. Chad, I'm happy to help, man. Wish me luck. I ordered a micro squirt for my Gen 3 LS. I have an MS3 Pro that I've run on the 4200, but that's my only experience with those. Do you have like Mercury engines for an engine dyno pool? Which Mercury engine are you talking about? Give me a specific Mercury engine. Did I say 120? I said 125,000 rain gap. Yeah, and the blow by was tremendous, and the motor ran terrible. So that's why it's being rebuilt, because there was so much wear that obviously there was a big ridge at the top of the piston. We couldn't get the piston out, and I just ground it down anyway and ball honed it, hoping that I could make it work. But then after seeing we got new rings for it, and I put new rings in it. We got oversized rings and put those in so we could bring the ring gap down to a reasonable, like 35 thousandths, which was still more than it needed for that application. But it didn't seal it up because the wall was wavy and stuff. And so now it's been bored and honed, and we will fix that. L15 is a Fit in the Civic SI. Would be cool to see some Mercury 5.0 versus Mustang 5.0 old school stuff. Do a dyno battle. What is a 5-liter Mercury engine? What car did that come in? The Fox body, there's no change in that. That's nothing has happened with that. The Omni had work done on it. You can see why oil scraper rings make sense. I thought that all the pistons have that. The Mercury 5.0 Capri, that's just a Ford engine. That's not a Mercury engine. That's just a 5-liter Ford in the Capri. I know the car, the little bubble back Capris that were it was the Firebird to it was the Firebird to the Camaro. The Mercury was to the Mustang, but that's just a 5-liter Mustang engine. That's the 302. There's nothing different about it. Richard, the Moroso pan and CV product starter for my LS4 Jules and Brandon's weldings on the LA4 mounts are phenomenal. Yeah, he really does good work. I mean, He's the guy that sent me out the 3800 stuff when I first started doing that, when I was trying to do 2 of those on the LS. On an Explorer 5 liter, like a baseline, when should the ignition be at maximum advance? I think Fox Body 3200 or 3400. We wouldn't be at. Is this a distributor that you have on here, or is it EFI? Normally, I have a timing curve in an EFI deal. A lot of times on a distributor, it goes full advance at 3000 or 3500, which I don't think is ideal. But we usually have less timing at the torque peak, and then more as it goes toward the power peak, and then less timing down low, because a lot of times we'll start the run at 2000 or 2500 or 3000, and then on the initial load in, it will have less timing there. Richard, a rule of thumb for gapping rings is 1 thou for every pound of boost. I don't do it that way. We put ring gap in. We add, like I said, you should add ring gap if you're putting a turbo on your motor. You should change the ring gap, and you should change it to all of it. You shouldn't change it based on the boost level. Big Mike, those split intake manifolds. I have videos up on the split Holley manifold. We've run those, and running it, so people know, running it with an elbow or a 4150 4-hole throttle body doesn't change what the manifold does. And running it under boost doesn't change what the manifold does. So all of that works the same. The only thing that might change is distribution, and distribution on a single plane intake manifold is not ideal anyway. So to make it perfect at every RPM under every load condition, you have to do EFI, and you have to do individual cylinder trimming on a single plane manifold to make it perfect. You can make it work, which is a different thing than making it perfect. How can you accurately judge the amount of ring gap you need? If the rings don't touch, that's the amount that you need. We do 6.5. The formula is 6.5 thousandths per inch of bore. That gives you enough ring gap where you don't have to worry about the rings touching. Richard, is the hot rod cam from BTR the largest they offer in the LS line? If it is, then I'll be using a comp cam or 408. The hot rod cam is not anywhere near the biggest cam that BTR offers. They have way bigger cams than that. They have cams that are 30 or 40 degrees at 50 bigger than that. I know the Fox Body guys have 14 degrees at idle, and the D347 SR crate motor wants full advance at 3800. However, mine is a 302. That's a full electronic ignition and no distributor. If you can get all of your timing in at 3400 and not have detonation, then that's a win. Like I said, in the old days, if you look at distributor stuff, a hopped up distributor on a performance application would have the ignition, would have full advance come in earlier than would have it all in usually by between 3,000 and 3,500. What's your preferred ring gap for an LS pushing 10 pounds or less than 10 pounds? 28 thousandths. Somebody was asking about $80 sloppy stage 2 cams. That's not a sloppy stage 2 cam. That's somebody else making it a cheap knockoff, like Monza was saying. And it's the ones that are the original ones are made by Elgin, and the camshaft, the specs of the camshaft work, and they will make power. And like I said, people are buying them because they're inexpensive, but they also, because it's a 228 cam, it's big enough to make power. it doesn't. It's not would be, not be my choice for a daily driver. Not on a 4.8 or a 5.3. You might be able to get away with it on a 6.0, but it would definitely need converter in the other two. And like I said, it's big enough to, especially if you run boost on it, but even on NA stuff, you can. It's big enough where you can make good power on it. So the ASC 5-liter 86 Capri is a set. Yeah, that's a 5-liter Mustang engine. That's a 5-liter Ford. And on the big bang motors where we were running 28 pounds or something, all of those had more than 30 thousandths gap. Took apart my 140,000 mile LQ9, had between 30 and 35 in the ring gaps from the factory. I've never seen any factory ring gap that had anywhere near that. I've never seen anyone worn that had that much ring gap. All the factory stuff is less than 20, usually in the teens. .331, 347, or 347 strokers more reliable than they used to be. I didn't. Was there a problem with them before? Some guys are worried about the side loading the motor and the rod angle and that stuff. But I've never met anybody who put together a 347 that wore the 347 out from side loading it, from having, got too much stroke on there and not enough rod length because I don't have enough deck height. So I can't put the 7-inch rod that I want in there. I've never seen anybody wear one out. So I don't know if that's that's like this piston flip thing and golf ball, the dimples and all these things that people want to talk about. I don't know anybody that's run one of those for 2 or 3 or 400,000 miles where that would actually become a problem. A 347 will make more power than a 331. If you feel like that's the side loading is going to be an issue, just put the shorter stroke in it. Dodging detonation secrets. Yeah, you should try to dodge. You should always try to dodge detonation at all costs. Yeah, on the ring thing, the more gap on the top ring or on the second ring is an arguable thing because I've seen recommendations from ring manufacturers and piston manufacturers offer. I've seen them want them different in their recommendations. So I make them the same. I put the same ring gap in both of them. Goldar, when we did, which by the way was the name of one of the monsters, an Ultraman, the 1,000 horsepower and the 2,000 horsepower stuff. I've never gone to 2,000 horsepower. At 1,500, we had 32 between 30 thousandths and 32 thousandths ring gap. It was just a go no go thing. They all had more than 30. Some of them probably had 35. The T76s are good for 800 horsepower piece. Why are you using 2 of them on that? I mean, you should, because why not? But that's way more turbo than you need for a stock LS4. You recommend you would not want a sloppy stage 2 on a daily driver 5.3? No, because you'd have to change the converter in it. The Truck Norris cam is a pretty good daily driver cam for a 5.3. I wouldn't get a Truck Norris for a 4.8 because you'll need a converter on a smaller 4.8. But on a 5.3, it's a pretty good camshaft. Yeah, Goldar, you don't need 80,000 ring gap on that. You don't need a formula for that. You just need, I would do 7 to 7.5 at 30 pounds if you're going for 2,000 horsepower. Is 310 over the nose too much spring pressure for a flat tappet cam break in? I don't know. That's not a lot of spring pressure for a flat tappet cam. If I was running a flat tappet, it would have that much. Is it a solid flat tappet or a hydraulic flat tappet? I would have at least that much spring pressure on a flat tappet cam. The break-in thing, I don't know. I can't tell you that it's not going to hurt it because it might, and it actually might have nothing to do with having 310 pounds of open pressure. Richard, does your LS smoke out the exhaust pipe when you go to 30,000 ring gap? No. But we're on the engine dyno, though. We're not driving it around. What are local 247 guys, and what's a piling issue? Lower compression will allow more fuel, and this is the question, is it a boomer myth or a fact? Lower compression will allow more fuel air and better power than higher compression with the same fuel air charge and less timing, same fuel type. I don't know when you start specifying parameters. The real question is, can you get away with, I'm hoping that you're talking about running boost in this thing. Because if it's an NA motor, more compression will make more power. So that's a fact. And usually, if your limitation is we're going to run 8 pounds on both of the motors, if you run 8 pounds on both of the motors, the one that starts out making more power and you add 8 pounds to that, it's going to end up making more power. But, and here's what your question is probably, is the bigger volume in the lower compression motor, is it going to allow more basically airflow and oxygen molecules in and potentially make more power? And the answer to that is I don't know. Every time I've tested a lower compression motor, it's made more and it's made less NA and it's made less under boost at any given boost level. But I'm doing that based off of boost. I'm not doing it based off of airflow. I don't know what the airflow is going into each one of those. So that would actually be a good question. Maybe if I do an interview with Gail Banks, hopefully he would have some sort of answers to figure that out. And maybe they've done some air hat testing when when he's run that to see what the difference is. Small block Chevy versus LS, cheapest choice for 650 horsepower NA. 650 horsepower NA from any of those is going to be very, very expensive because it's definitely going to be a stroker and it's definitely going to be lots of cylinder head and lots of camshaft and lots of intake manifold and lots of compression. Port matching on a Holley high ram, not on a turbo LS. I wouldn't worry about it. The reduction in compression for boosted applications was more to ward off detonation. Richard, does anyone run a flat tap a cam in an LS? I don't think so. I never have. Somebody's asking about running the biggest lift. You shouldn't be asking about lift on the camshaft. I mean, you can. I don't want to stop you from doing that, but the lift isn't the thing that's going to limit the available piston to valve clearance. Goldar, we ran 1540 with a stock bottom end LS with two S475 turbos and the big bang deal, and it had 32,000 string gap. So you don't need 40 for what you're doing. Was there an issue with valve chain geometry on LS heads once you hit 600 lift? No, there can be an issue with the rocker coming off of the tip, but guys are running more than that. You could put a roller rocker on it. I'm running some port and polished 862s. They've been decked, so I'm not sure how much duration and lift I can run. You need to measure it. You need to measure available piston to valve clearance. And on that note, it is time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up. And I did not have a poll for tonight. I forgot all about it once we got going, and that's usually what happens. But I will see you guys all tomorrow.